What's the brokest you've ever been? I got caught up in the housing crisis back in 2006. It looked like I had enough to afford a cute little house, nothing extravagant. I was surprised when they gave me the loan, and as I didn't have much in the way of credit and I was in my early 20s. When I went to sign and saw the monthly note, my heart sank. I should have refused to sign and cut my losses, but I was dumb and went ahead with it. I figured I could just budget like hell and make it work. It lasted about a year. At any given point, I was either behind on my note or my electricity or gas was cut off. Sometimes all three. Got caught up in an endless cycle of payday loans. Came home to an empty house that was with dark or cold every day after 12-hour manual labor shifts, usually taking cold showers with the light from an old hurricane lantern. Don't even get me started on food. It usually consisted of rice and beans cooked over an old camp stove I rigged to a propane tank on my back porch. Eventually they foreclosed and I had to start everything from scratch. But I learned a lot during that period. Took me almost 15 years to get stable enough where I could finally buy a house again. I worked as a bank teller for 2 years, and was able to collect many American silver coins, such as quarters, dimes, and nickels made during certain years. Had probably $75 worth of silver coins, worth much more to collectors. For those wondering, the bank didn't care if I took those coins as long as I replaced them for the same face value, it's all legal tender to them. But one day my gas tank was empty. I needed gas, had $0 in my account and no other money. I went to a pawn shop and barely got over face value for all my silver coins. Got 3/4 a tank of gas. It wasn't about the money though, it was about those 2 years searching and collecting and getting excited when I'd come across one. All but traded away for something my car burned off in less than a week. Rolling pennies for insulin in college before Obamacare. My single mom was poor and couldn't help. Back then, if you were not insured when you were diagnosed in childhood, insurance didn't cover insulin because it was a pre-existing condition. One month I was so broke from getting laid off that I applied for emergency Medicaid for my insulin but made $4 over the poverty limit. I asked what I was supposed to do for insulin and they told me to go to the emergency, which would have put me further in debt. I called the local Ada in tears to ask if there was any way someone could get me some expired insulin. The lady gave me a number and told me I could only call it once. It turned out to be a man who owned a small private pharmacy that had been a family business. He gave me 4 months of insulin and other supplies that was enough to not only get me through but get me ahead in my rent and groceries. Back then over half my money went to insulin and test strips. Sir, if you are out there, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your kindness restored my hope. I couldn't pay you back, but I do pay it forward. 7 years ago, my debit got declined for gas. Credit got declined for gas. Guy at pump next to me asked for $5 for gas as I saw his card get declined too. I used my last $10 cash to give us both $5 in gas. That day, I sold the guitar my dad gave me to get my family to payday. I promised myself that I'd never be that bad off again. After that, I went back to a profession I absolutely despised for 4 more years because I knew I'd make the most money to get back on our feet. That sacrifice got me where I am now. And my wife found the exact guitar from the shop I sold it to. They tracked down their buyer, who still had it, and my wife called him and told him the story. He sold it back to my wife and she gave it back to me as a Christmas gift 2 years ago. That's the only time my kids have seen me cry. The sentiment behind me first getting it, then getting it again. Had started a new job after a stretch of unemployment. With my first 2 or 3 paychecks I paid off all my backlog of unpaid bills. So I'm about 2 mo into new job and realize even though my bills are paid and I made my min payment that month, my CC was still maxed out from accumulated interest and I only have about $30 to feed myself and get to and from work for the next 9 days until my new paycheck hits the account. During my lunch break at work I was frantically trying to budget what I could. I was thinking I would jog home the 10-ish me from work a few times that week. It was winter in the Northeast, but it would save me the $2.50 subway fare. I was bouncing this idea off a co-worker because she occasionally jogged home in nicer weather and lived near me. Just to see if the route was safe. Before I left that day she handed me $170 in cash and a huge grocery bag full of pasta, rice and veggies. The overwhelming emotions I felt in that moment I will never forget. It's like when you don't realize your entire body is tensed and then suddenly you are able to release all that tension. The kindness she showed to what was essentially a stranger stuck with me forever. At the time, she was just a stranger helping another stranger who wasn't expecting help, but desperately needed it. 9 years later, and we're actually best friends. We go for a weekly walk together, and she's going to be in my wedding a year from now. A period of a week in my 91 Cavalier. Rice cakes and gallons of water. I was quite organized and thoughtful going into it. Actually was appreciative of the minimalism. I will say this. Even working 60 hours a week and saving, the police pick right up on folks who fall out of housing in very short order. It's not comfortable to think there are defined tiers in society that make life more risky to be fined or harassed. It's not a good look and exists more than some other highlighted stripes in society. Anecdotally, hitchhiking used to be so ubiquitous and friendly. They adjudicated that out of our society. I'd like anyone to read of the period of the Great Depression and the network that families, not the government, provided assistance up and down the railroads and towns of America. If your great-grandparents lived near the tracks, they most likely had a cot and accommodation for a migrant worker or hobo. Can we get back to that mindset in general when dealing with addiction, poverty is a more seemingly sophisticated society? We lose money by paying more in material taxes and lives catching up to the problem. Spend the $20 billion a year, 600 your accounting mistakes for weapons are going to be more. Demand, dare I say? Here is my COVID story. I worked 2 jobs and lost both my main office job during COVID and as a waitress. Food deliveries became a big deal and asked to work full-time as a delivery driver. For almost a year, each delivery day, especially the end of the month, was make or break and worked 6 days a week. In April, I got a big tip from a nice older lady, $20 on the order, which was a fair 15% is and 20 cash on top because I was nicer than the angry Indian guys who also delivered. She was my last delivery of the night and made her tip gave me my missing $13 to pay rent. I funneled my change with the closing manager to put enough gas in my car. The restaurant gave me leftovers at night to be able to eat. Most I shared with my neighbor who was a single mom and her son who had nothing, not even food.